As Gareth said at the beginning, today marks the beginning of Advent. And for many, Advent is simply and purely the countdown to Christmas. Just yesterday, I drove past a long line of people queuing to get into a shop, I guess cashing in on what was left of the Black Friday sales. They were waiting in line outside in the cold and the rain, seemingly for as long as it took, all so that they could part with some cash and pick up some bargains. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Many will have been buying gifts as tokens of love towards family and friends. Others may have been overextending themselves to keep up with the unrealistic expectations that are such a burden on many at this time of year. Maybe a few were thinking, even as they scanned their bank card, of the great gift from God at the heart of Christmas. Maybe. But for me, it was a picture of what Advent generally looks like. It's the few weeks of madness where we get ready for Christmas. And well, it is that, if we mean getting ready to celebrate God coming into the world in the person of Jesus. But Advent is also way more than that. Advent means coming or arrival, and yes, the arrival of Jesus celebrated in Christmas. But more than that, the arrival of Jesus when he comes back at the end of time. Advent looks forward to Jesus' return. It's about being ready for Jesus to come back. I did a quick search and came across lots of images like this one. If we've got it. Jesus is coming, look busy. I could not believe how much merchandise was available with this particular slogan on it. The message from our gospel reading this morning is more like Jesus is coming, be ready. Be ready, thank you. Those people queued in the rain yesterday to get hold of things they believed would make someone's life better in some way. What Jesus offers is infinitely better. Jesus invites us to share the life of heaven. And folks, it's not something we have to queue up for. We're not going through this life stood in line waiting to get in. The good news is even better than that. We get to live the life of heaven here and now. In fact, that is the appropriate response to this teaching from Jesus in Matthew 24. Before we dive into that, let's just set the scene. Now, I know we've just finished looking through the Sermon on the Mount, but we're here again, Matthew 24, and Jesus is sitting on a mountainside teaching his followers. It's like nothing has changed. Their question on this occasion, we have to go back to verse 3 of chapter 24 to find it, is when will the end of things happen? When will the end come? And what will be the sign of Jesus' return at the end of the age? Now, just in case you want to go and read this later, a warning, Matthew 24 and chapter 25 as well, they're really difficult to make sense of because Jesus is talking about two things that are yet to happen from their perspective. There's parts of it where he's pointing forward to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which would come to pass in AD 70. And there are other parts where he's clearly pointing forward to his own return at the end of the age. And it'd be really easy to get lost in kind of figuring all of that out. So if you're reading that, it's worth remembering this. Jesus doesn't teach to just impart knowledge. His goal, that's not what rabbis did. His goal in teaching isn't just trying to download a whole load of information into the minds of his disciples, especially not about dates and times and all the rest of it. Now, Jesus teaches in order to shape his followers' lives around his kingdom. What he's doing here is preparing them to live in the light of eternity, to become the kind of people who are ready by living the kingdom life now. So let's look through these verses together. Verse 36. No one knows about that day or hour. Well, which day or hour is he talking about? The next verse tells us the coming of the Son of Man, the coming of Jesus, his return at the end of the age. So we can be clear, for this section at least, which thing he's talking about. And he says, no one knows when it will happen, only the Father. So he's not trying to generate speculation about when the end will happen or when exactly he's going to come. Even Jesus himself doesn't know. Verse 37 to 39, he then paints this picture, this comparison with the days of Noah. It will be like the days of Noah. You probably remember Noah. He built a boat. The animals went in 2 by 2, apart from the ones that went in 7 by 7. Check it out later. And the bit we tend to play down in Sunday school, at least, is 99.9% of the Earth's population were then wiped out by a flood sent by God. Why did that happen? It was God's judgment on a world gone bad. God's judgment on a world that turned its back on God. When Jesus returns, it will involve God's judgment. But the other key thing in the story of Noah is this idea of readiness. The flood came as a huge surprise to most, and it caught people unprepared. A few years ago, I gather there's some issues again at the moment when I was looking this up, but a few years ago, there was a wonderful week or two where KFC they temporarily had to close 800 of their 900 stores. Do you remember that? Kentucky Fried Chicken ran out of chicken. And it turned out that a well-known delivery company had tried to get in on the action, and they'd seriously undercut the existing supplier. And it turned out they didn't really realise how much chicken KFC might need. In the days of Noah, no one but Noah was ready. They were unprepared. When the flood came, everyone else was swept away while Noah was saved. And in the story of Noah, there are only 2 categories of people. There are those who were prepared and therefore saved, and those who were not prepared and therefore lost. But the implication in that is that it is possible to prepare by a life of constant readiness. We need to live in the light of this future reality of Jesus' return, even though others might look on us as silly for doing so. I don't know if you've seen the film Evan Almighty. It's quite funny in parts. And it paints the story of Noah and just the ridiculousness of building an ark when there is no rain in sight. The ridiculousness for us of living a life of obedience to Jesus, living the life of his kingdom here and now, will cause others to look on us and our choices and think we are mad. That we're missing out fundamentally on what they think life is about, when really we're living in a state of readiness for the reality of God's kingdom to come. And of course, when the floods arrive and the rain starts to pour, in that moment, they all look to the boat, they all want to get on. But in that moment, it's too late. In verses 40 and 41, Jesus gives us some everyday examples of how this will then play out. There are 2 men working side by side in the fields, and 2 women working side by side, grinding the flour at the mill. One of each will be taken, the other left. And the difference is not in their work. It's not something that they are doing particularly that makes the difference. It's about whether they are ready, which ultimately is about who they are living for. The verb translated taken there is usually about being taken in order to be with someone. Those who are taken to be with Jesus, the one they are living for. He has come back for his own. And at this point in this story, it doesn't elaborate on where. That's not the point that Jesus is addressing. The point is that they are ready. They were living the life of Jesus' kingdom already. And so verse 42, the only appropriate response to this knowledge is to keep watch. Constant readiness is what's called for. And then verses 43 and 44, we get another punchy image from Jesus, of him coming back like a thief in the night. When it happens, it happens. There's no predicting it. It will be all of a sudden when he comes. And so again, the only option we have is to be ready. Jess and I love the Marvel films, and one of the characters I find most fascinating is the Hulk, how he can be kind of relatively mild and timid, kind of Bruce Banner. That is his name, isn't it? Yeah. In one moment, and then all of a sudden he's the kind of the raging Hulk. And there's a moment in one of the films where they really need the Hulk to appear. They're in big trouble unless he shows up, and there's no sign. And they have this conversation, and all of a sudden he kind of walks towards the action as Bruce Banner and begins to transform and reveals that actually the secret is he has to be angry to be the Hulk. The secret is that he's always angry. He's always ready, just at a moment's notice, to go and to become the Hulk. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying we all need to carry around raging anger inside. That's not what I'm saying at all. The point is, he was always ready. He didn't have to do something in the moment to try and kind of switch it on. He was there and ready to go. When Jesus comes, will we be found ready? It will be too late to try and switch things on when he arrives. And Paul picks up all of this same theme in the reading we heard from Romans 13. So I just want to finish with a brief look there. It's just another different picture, another angle on the same thing in Romans 13, where Paul calls us to wake up from our slumber because the day is nearly here. I don't know why, but when I read these words this week, it got me thinking about camping, not because I'm in any way contemplating going anytime soon. Maybe I'm just longing for the warmth of summer again. But one of the things I love about camping is that you're so much closer to the elements, sometimes too close, admittedly. But one thing I always notice when I'm sleeping in a tent is this, that I get more sleep. Because I tend to go to sleep not long after the sun has gone down. And then I also wake up much earlier as well. I tend to wake up when the sun does. And it's great to be up and about and getting ahead of the day rather than sleeping through the first part of the morning. Well, that sense of getting ahead of the day is what Paul is on about here. The new age of God's kingdom has already begun. A new day is dawning. We know this because of Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension to the right hand of the Father. And we are to start living in that new day, even though the world, or most of it at least, is still sleeping. Wake up! Live as if it is already daytime. And so Paul, essentially, you could say, says, don't behave badly. He lists a whole load of ways that might look like, ways that we try to gratify the flesh, satisfy our own selfish desires, putting ourselves first rather than God. But notice the alternative he offers is not a list of positive behaviours. The alternative is to clothe ourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. Because when we make Jesus the Lord of our lives, then our behaviour, our choices will naturally begin to reflect his character and his rule. Jesus is coming back. It might be later today. It might be later this week. It might be next year. It may be years down the line. It may not happen in our earthly lifetime, but Jesus is coming back. We are to become the kind of people who are ready, already living the kingdom life here and now. Shall we pray?